I am here to help you crack your next SQL interview. I have solved hundreds of questions available in different platforms like DataLemur, Stratascratch, and I can clearly see there are SQL patterns which each and every SQL questions follow. I could sum up to 9 SQL patterns in total. These are where condition, the order by, the limit clause, the join conditions, the group by, having along with group by, aggregate functions used in group by, then there are windows functions, and then there were some miscellaneous or other common patterns. If you have not seen my previous video where I have given you an overview of these and also covered point 1, 2 and 3, that is where, order by and limit, then I'll recommend after this video you can go back and check the part 1 of this series. In today's video, I'm planning to cover the remaining SQL patterns, namely join, group by, having, aggregate functions, window functions, and some other common patterns tagged to miscellaneous category. So without wasting any time, let's move to the pattern number 4, which is join. Now I know many SQL beginners, they are scared of join conditions. They are not sure whether to use inner join, left join, cross join, self join. But what I have seen after solving all these SQL questions is handling joins in any SQL interview is generally easier than the actual business case scenarios. As an interviewer, I do not want you to invest time figuring out what columns to use to join a table, right? So in most of the cases, I'll say 99% of the cases, I could see there is a common column available in both the tables and the joining conditions were pretty straightforward. So it was not like I don't have the domain knowledge, so I don't know what to join with what. It will be very straightforward, like employee ID, department ID, all these common columns will be given to you and you can find a very mutual column that exists in table 1 as well as table 2 and you can join this, right? So now talking specifically about some of the use cases I see is that you have to use left join along with the null condition. So when it is used is when you want to check what data is available in one table and is not available in another table. In that case, we use left outer join with a where condition and we check for the column which is non-driving table whether that column is null or not. So in the first example you can see I am trying to figure out whether there is any customer who has not placed any order. So what I am doing is I am doing a customer join left join with orders table and then in the where condition I am giving order.customer ID is null. So it means that all the customer who have not placed any order. So all remember this case left join with null condition. It is very important, asked very often in the interview questions. Then there are inner joins. So inner joins basically brings you data from both the tables. So in the second example you can see that I want information for all the products for which some transaction has happened, right? So here I am not saying all the products where transaction has not happened. You can very clearly understand that yes, this is the inner join case because I want entry to be present in both the tables. So that's why I went for inner join. Similarly, there is a cross join. Now you say cross join is very bad, we should avoid it, its performance is very bad. But in many cases, cross join will actually help you a lot. But when you are using a cross join, make sure that the table which you are using for cross join has one row only. So typically in this case, you see, if you have a table, like I have created a derived table here, employee max, and this table will only have one row. This derived table will only have one row. So we know, right, in cross join, if there are m rows in table 1 and n rows in table 2, the output will have m into n rows. But if my table 2, instead of n, it has one row only, so the output will have m into 1 equal to m rows only, right? So we are not exponentially growing our result set. So in such cases, it is okay to use cross join because you are not impacting your final result set by increasing the number of records. So this is one example where you can do a cross join where the other table has just one row and you can use it in the cross join. Self join case. So self join is like you will have just one table in the question, but you cannot directly run an SQL query on top of it to get all the information, right? So a typical example of self join is where manager and employee, both the information are in the same table, but we do a self join. So self join is nothing. It is a common case of inner join or left outer join. Only thing is that both the table 1 and table 2 are same tables. So it's just a special category of join where when table 1 and table 2 both are same, we call it as a self join. At a high level, you can say it is just another case of inner join or left join where both the tables are same. Table 1 and table 2 both are the same table. I think if you cover these conditions for join, you should be good. Left join with null condition, inner join, cross join with subquery of one row output, self join, left join with some conditions, and full join. Next, we'll talk about group by. So we all know, right? Group by is used for aggregation purpose. Whenever there is some matrices in the data and we want to do some calculations on top of it, we use group by clause. Now group by, generally you can do it on a single column or you can do it on the multiple columns. Now the number one problem I have seen with even the experienced people using group by is they use some column in the select statement that is not an aggregate column. Whenever I say aggregate, just think of average, max, min, sum, count, these functions, right? So all the columns which are present in the select statement, right, select clause, either it should have a aggregate function on it, which is average, max, min, sum, count, etc., or it should be a part of group by clause here, right? So what I have seen is like here in this case, example 4, if you see, select user ID, tweet date, count of distinct tweet date as this. Now what I have seen many experienced people, what they will do is they will not include this user IDs in the group by. So it's a technical error. In most of the RDBMS, it is a syntax error because all the columns present in select statement when you're using a group by clause, they should either be part of group by statement or they should have a count, max, min, some function on top of it. So please be careful whenever you are using a group by for aggregation purpose. You should verify your select column list and your group by column list, and any column which is not part of aggregate function in select list should be part of group by function. In technical terms, we call it non-aggregate column should be part of group by clause. So please make sure that whenever you are working using group by, you use all the non-aggregate columns in the group by statement. So this is about group by. You can have a single column group by also, and you can have a multiple columns also in the group by. Let's move to the next pattern. The next pattern is having. So having generally does not come alone, it comes along with the group by statement. So whenever you have to apply filters in SQL, there are multiple ways you can do it. One very common way is applying a where condition. The other method is if you want to apply filter on the aggregated data, like you have some data and you have aggregated it, compacted it, calculated sum, count, max, min, and now you want to apply filter on this aggregated data, not the individual rows but the compacted rows. Then you will use the having clause along with the group by. So if you see here, some of the common patterns I have seen in these SQL queries is you apply count column and then you compare it to some hard-coded value or to some logic. Like here in this case, in the first example, you can see I'm just checking that how many policy holders have more than or equal to 3 cases tagged to it. What I am doing is I'm calculating the count that for each policy holder how many cases they have raised, and then now once that aggregation is done, now I want to apply filter on it. I am not applying filter before aggregation, I have to apply filter after aggregation. So what I am doing is I am using having count of case ID greater than equal to 3. I am applying filter on my aggregated data. This is not necessary that whatever function I am using here, I have to use the same function here in the having clause. It can be different as well, right? Similarly, there is another pattern which was very clearly visible in the SQL questions I have solved is you use some function and compare it to some hard-coded value or some logic, right? So in the having clause. So let's look here in the third example. So here what I'm doing is I'm just calculating sum of bonus. Similarly, instead of having a hard-coded value compared to a having condition, I can also have some logic. Like here you can see having sum of this is greater than sum of this is this. So I can also have some conditions compared with the sum clause. So I can also have a hard-coded value as well as some logic in my having clause, right? Always remember, in some RDBMS you can directly use having also. In most of the RDBMS I have worked, having always is following a group by statement. So when you have a group by, you are doing some aggregation, you are compacting the rows, calculating some measures, and you want to apply filter on that after result, then you will use having clause, you will not use where condition. Okay. If this is clear, I would like to move to the next pattern. which is aggregate function. So group by having aggregate, I can club in all these three into a single pattern, but I have kept it here different because if I keep everything in a single pattern, it may become overwhelming. So whenever you have to calculate some measures, I want you to think about three patterns. One is the group by. After group by, you have to think about having if you want to apply filter on the aggregated data. And then comes the aggregate functions, that how do you want to show those measures, or how do you want to calculate those measures and show it on the output. Most of the common aggregate functions I saw in these SQL questions were max, min, sum, count, average, and in some cases count along with the distinct also. If you see the last query here, select count of distinct user ID from users. So many people, they remember max, min, sum, count, average, but they forget count and distinct also can be used together. Always remember, distinct applies to all the column list and not just the first column coming in the select, right? So if I have count, distinct user ID, comma, department ID, like that, the distinct will apply to both the columns and not just user ID. So please be careful when using the distinct class. This completes overall patterns related to the aggregation, which is group by, having, and aggregate functions. Let's move to the next pattern, which is window functions. Now many people I have seen, even the experienced professional, when they are in the SQL interview, they get confused whether to use group by or whether to use a window function. And to tell you, it is very straightforward. Whenever you will apply a group by function, it will reduce the number of rows, right? So if I have 100 rows coming in, and if I apply group by, the output may be 100 rows or it can be lesser than that, because I am doing some aggregation, right? So for whichever column I am applying, I am putting it in the group by clause. If there are some duplicates or if there are common rows for that, the number of output rows will reduce. So say I have 5 entry for user A and 5 entry for user B in the input rows, and I do a group by user. In that case, what will happen? The 5 input rows for user A will become 1 output row for user A, and 5 input rows for user B will become 1 output row for user B, right? So what will happen in the input? I have 5 rows for user A, 5 rows for user B. In the output, I will have only 1 row for user A and 1 row for user B. So you see, right, what has happened? The group by actually tends to reduce the number of rows you see in the output. But when it comes to window function, it does not reduce by its own, unless and until you explicitly apply filter to reduce the number of rows. Common window functions I have used in these SQL queries is row number, rank, dense rank. There is a difference between rank and dense rank. Were sum, count, lead, lag, max, min, average. If you find window functions little complicated, I have created another video where I have explained it in details. I will share the link in the description box below. I will strongly suggest to go through that video, which will clear all your doubts related with window functions. So once window function is done, then there were some other SQL patterns which I cannot create a different category altogether for it, but these are worth mentioning and you should remember it when going into any SQL interview. You may have 5 digits after decimal point, but in the output you just want first 2 digits, right? So you may want to round your decimal values. You may want to use absolute value also. Sometimes say you are doing some operations in SQL, say amount debited minus amount credited, and you want output to be always positive. So in that case, you can use an absolute function to make sure that whatever the output A minus B, the output is always shown as positive. Similarly, there will be some questions where you have to manipulate dates. Either you want to extract some date parts, like extract a year component or a month component from the date, and you may want to add some intervals. Intervals could be like 1 day, 2 day, 1 month, 1 year in the date, right? So you may want to work on some date manipulation task as well. Other than that, there are string functions like substring, concatenate. These are basic string functions. So you should be aware about some common string operations which you may use to manipulate your output data. Then there is another common pattern which I'll say is a very important SQL pattern, which I have seen in many SQL questions while solving on these SQL platforms, was you do a case statement and then you apply sum or count on top of it. So if you see this example here, what I am doing is I am applying a case statement. Case when activity type equal to then this, and then I am applying a sum function on top of it, right? So if you are not comfortable with it, what I'll say is you don't have to apply sum along with the case. You can wait, you can create a derived table for it, and then once you have the result set, apply a sum on top of it. This is a very common pattern. I will share a link of the 10 SQL interview questions I've solved, and I've used this pattern there for multiple queries. This is a very, very important part. I can't emphasize more on this SQL pattern. You must be very well versed with sum, count along with the case statement while solving any SQL questions. The last pattern I want to tell you about the set operators. Don't undermine the power and the value which union, all, except, intersect, these set operators bring, because many times you may be thinking only about the join conditions, how you can do it more efficiently. But if at that moment, if you can think about the union and whether it is applicable there, you can solve the SQL queries very easily and very quickly and very efficiently also. So this is it. I just wanted to cover a high level of all the SQL patterns I have encountered while solving hundreds and thousands of SQL queries across the platform. This was not a dive deep into all these SQL patterns. The agenda was just to give you an overview that such SQL patterns exist, and rather than following the hard work approach where you just go on, log in into these platforms, start solving questions one by one, and then you spend hours and hours just to solve those SQL questions and still not confident whether the next question you will be able to solve or not. I just wanted to give you a alternate approach of solving these SQL questions. So just remember these 9 SQL patterns. Whenever you get a question, try to map SQL patterns to that question and bring that SQL patterns into life. Try to solve those SQL questions using the patterns. At start, it may take some time for you, but I'm pretty sure after a few weeks of effort, this SQL pattern thing will come very naturally to you. And as and when you are reading the questions, it will come to your mind, okay, these SQL patterns are applicable, and you will be able to solve most of the SQL queries very easily and confidently. You have to trust me on this. All right, thank you for this. If you have any comments, leave it in the comment box below. I do read all your comments and I try to answer it as quickly as possible.